Unless you've been living under a rock, then you know all about the Gabby Petito case. But recently, this case has been back in the headlines. New details have been released. Gabby Petito and Brian Laundrie met in high school, but had only been dating for about 2 years. During the summer of last year, they began their van life journey in Gabby's cute little Ford Transit Connect. They would travel, camp, and explore various different locations, while Gabby vlogged and documented every step of the way. They planned to live a nomadic lifestyle, which just means continuously moving from place to place, traveling light, and having a minimalistic mindset. It seems like an amazing way to live. During the pandemic, more and more Americans were pushed to try out this new, exciting way of life. But nomadic life isn't all rainbows and sunshine. It can be very, very lonely at times. Not having a place to call home, always on the go, away from family and friends, living in isolation, most people can't stick to this lifestyle long term. It's a life of constant ups and downs, with no real stability, and it can be an emotional roller coaster. This was proven to be the case with Gabby and Brian. Only a couple months into their trip, trouble began brewing. An incident occurred that was said to have started over Brian climbing into the van with dirty feet at a little store in Moab, Utah. It seemed like Brian was attempting to leave Gabby out there, alone and stranded. Witnesses called 911 as Brian and Gabby sped off to report that they had just seen Brian hit Gabby. When police caught up with them, both Gabby and Brian had visible marks from a clear domestic violence dispute. Officers completely dropped the ball and made no arrest, only suggesting that they spend one night apart. If only they'd handled this situation differently, Gabby might still be here today. One or both of them getting arrested would have likely ended their trip. It would have alerted Gabby's parents, and maybe things wouldn't have ended so badly. Just weeks later, Brian returned home in Florida to his parents' house in Gabby's van without Gabby. When Gabby's parents were not able to reach her, they became concerned and started calling Brian and his parents. After no one returned their calls, they reported Gabby missing. Investigators showed up at the Laundrie's home only to be given a note from their attorney stating that they wished to remain silent. Over a period of about 2 weeks, the Laundries said nothing and refused to help in finding Gabby. She had been strangled and had blunt force trauma injuries. The whole world searched for Brian. There were supposed sightings of Brian all over the world. Of course, they were all false because his body was recovered at his last known location. He had taken his own life and left a notebook behind admitting to taking the life of his girlfriend Gabby. End of story? Not quite. The Petitos were furious with the Laundries for what they feel like was withholding information and attempting to help their son escape. They filed a lawsuit alleging that Brian told his parents, Christopher and Roberta Laundrie, that he killed Gabby before he returned home alone from their trip, and that the couple concealed their son's alleged confession from the Petito family and authorities. In this notebook was the most ridiculous, unbelievable story, where Brian tries to be the hero by saying that he ever so mercifully killed Gabby after she fell in the creek and hit her head. Gabby, I wish I was right at your side. I wish I could be talking to you right now. I'd be going through every memory we made, getting even more excited for the future. But we lost our future. I can't live without you. I've lost every day we could have spent together, every holiday. I'll never get to play with Illegible again. Never go hiking with TJ. I loved you more than anything. I can't bear to look at our photos, to recall great times, because it is why I cannot go on. When I close my eyes, I think of laughing on the roof of the van, falling asleep to the sight of Illegible at the Crystal Geyser. I will always love you. If you were reading Gab's journal, looking at photos from our life together, flipping through old cards, you wouldn't want to live a day without her. Knowing that every day you'll wake up without her, you wouldn't want to wake up. I'm sorry to everyone this will affect. Gabby was the love of my life, but I know adored by many. I'm so very sorry to her family because I love them. I'd consider her younger siblings my best of friends. I'm sorry to my family. This is a shock to them as well, a terrible grief. They loved as much, if not more than me. A new daughter to my mother, an aunt to my nephews. Please do not make this harder for them. This occurred as an unexpected tragedy. Rushing back to our car, trying to cross the streams of Illegible before it got too dark to see, too cold. I hear a splash and a scream. I could barely see. I couldn't find her for a moment, shouted her name. I found her breathing heavily, gasping my name. She was freezing cold, Illegible, the blazing hot national parks in Utah. The temperature had dropped to freezing, and she was soaking wet. I carried her as far as I could from the stream toward the car, stumbling, exhausted, in shock, when my Illegible, and knew I couldn't safely carry her. I started a fire and spooned her as close to the heat. She was so thin, had already been freezing too long. I couldn't at the time realize that I should have started a fire first, but I wanted her out of the cold, back to the car. From where I started the fire, I had no idea how far the car might be. Only knew it was across the creek. When I pulled Gabby out of the water, she couldn't tell me what hurt. She had a small bump on her forehead that eventually got larger. Her feet hurt, her wrists hurt, but she was freezing, shaking violently. While carrying her, she continually made sounds of pain. Laying next to her, she said little lisping between violent shakes, gasping in pain, begging for an end to her pain. She would fall asleep and I would shake her awake, fearing she shouldn't close her eyes if she had a concussion. She would wake in pain, start her whole painful cycle again, illegible, furious that I was the one waking her. She wouldn't let me try to cross the creek, thought like me that the fire would go out in her sleep and she'd freeze. I don't know the extent of Gabby's injuries, only that she was in extreme pain. I ended her life. I thought it was merciful, that it is what she wanted. But I see now all the mistakes I made. I panicked. I was in shock. But from the moment I decided, took away her pain, I knew I couldn't go on without her. I rushed home to spend any time I had left with my family. I wanted to drive north and let James and TJ kill me, but I wouldn't want them to spend time in jail over my mistake, even though I'm sure they would have liked to. I am ending my life not because of fear of punishment, but rather because I can't stand to live another day without her. I've lost our whole future together, every moment we could have shared. I'm sorry for everyone's loss. Please do not make life harder for my family. They lost a son and a daughter. The most wonderful girl in the world. Gabby, I'm sorry. I have killed myself by the creek in the hopes that animals may tear me apart, that it may make some of her family happy. Please pick up all of my things. Gabby hated people who litter. This is such a Chris Watts move. If you're not familiar, Chris Watts took out his entire family and then tried to blame his wife Shan'ann for the murder of the children because he couldn't bear the thought of people believing that he was a monster. You may think that Brian is not throwing Gabby under the bus in this letter, but actually he is. He's basically blaming her. He's saying that she did this to herself, that she fell and caused her own injuries, that she begged him to end her life and he only granted her wish. Chris Watts, with the help of his family, convinced a lot of people that Shan'ann was the monster and Chris only did what anyone else would have done. Chris's mom, sister, friends, and later his dad participated in spreading lies about Shan'ann all over social media to ruin her reputation in an attempt to save the reputation of their son. This is exactly what Chris and Roberta are trying to do with the release of this stupid letter. There's no doubt that they believe every word that their son wrote, and they thought that we would all believe it as well. Do you guys remember these posts where friends of Roberta's defended Brian and said awful things about Gabby? They said Gabby was the one with serious mental health issues, called her a narcissist with compulsive and controlling problems. Right away, they wanted to paint Gabby in a negative light to try to minimize what their son had done. This sounds all too familiar. What's next? Are there going to be more attempts to try to manipulate how the public views your son? Just stop. Let's not play this game. You'll lose and you will be even more hated by the public than you already are.
I don't know if it was released in an effort to try to find some kind of sympathy for Brian because of what's contained in there. I don't see that. If he's trying to garner sympathy, I don't think that's going to work because it's an admission that he killed her. And even more so, if this was the woman he loved and there's supposed to be some sympathy, he left her body there and told no one where she was, or at least not my clients where she was.
Gabby's family's attorney called out Stephen Bertolino, stating, if you are going to release the notebook, release all of the contents.
Yeah, as I had said to you earlier, I was kind of shocked that this was released within about a half an hour after we left the FBI office up in Tampa. And I find it ironic that Mr. Bertolino says he wants, in full transparency, was releasing this. Well, someone should ask him why he doesn't release the entire notebook, but more importantly, ask him why he doesn't release Roberta Laundrie's letter to her son. The letter appears to be written to Brian after Gabby was killed, and there's some pretty extreme things that she said in there that, without having a letter here to quote it, I don't want to say, but I will simply tell you that there's some pretty extreme things that were contained within that letter.
He mentioned another piece of evidence that has not been released yet. He said Stephen Bertolino is in possession of a letter written to Brian by Roberta, Brian's mother. On the envelope, it said, "Burn after you read this."
The letter is undated, so it's uncertain when it was written, but certainly based upon what's contained within the letter, it would appear as though the letter were written after Gabby was killed and before Brian took his life. And the letter is currently in the possession of Mr. Bertolino.
Was that one of the items?
I will tell you, by the way, that on the envelope that contained the letter, the words "burn after you read this" were written. But there was the most I want to say is that there was an offer to assist Brian with some things in that letter. But it was found on Brian, or actually was found in the van when he came back. So I'm led to believe that he had that, he received that before he came back to Northport, but I don't know that for certain.
Oh, so the letter was found in the van?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I'm sorry, no. The letter was found in the Laundrie's home, but it had been taken out of the van.
He also stated that there was another letter that tells a very different story than what Brian wrote in this notebook.
And this story that has been presented by Brian and his final words to the world, what do you and your clients make of this story?
That's a version. There's another version. I don't have a copy of the other version yet, but I've been advised that there's another version that he authored that we will be getting, hopefully through the Freedom of Information request. That does not entirely match up this particular version.
So you're saying that there is a second note of confession?
Yes.
And is it a written note of confession?
It's on a device.
It's a device. Is it
Yes.
Is it a typed out note?
To the best of my knowledge, yes.
What I found interesting when I talked to Mr. Riley last night was that he said that Mr. Bertolino, the look on his face when that letter was in evidence was shock, and that he says Mr. Bertolino was not expecting it, which I found to be very, very interesting that he said Mr. Bertolino looked shocked. And then he also said, I think you said, I think I don't have my notes in front of me and I can't look at my phone because I'm on the Zoom, but he said something about an offer, that it was an offer from Roberta to Brian. And then he told me, and it was like I was trying to pull it out of him because he didn't have the letter in front of him. And he really didn't want to talk that much about it, but like kind of did. So I was like trying really hard. And the most I got out of him was he said something to the effect of, Roberta said, I would bake a cake and put a saw in it,
right,
if you end up in jail. Something like that, which I thought was really weird, which again was interesting because Mr. Bertolino, when he responded to the letter to us, said it was a letter from a long time ago before the trip. But like, why would Roberta be talking about jail if this letter was even before their trip? But then I've seen on Twitter some people saying some of this has to do with possibly movie references. So I don't really know what to make of it. Again, it came out of nowhere. I wasn't expecting it.
We all suspected that the Laundries knew very well what their son had done, but now the specifics of it all are starting to come out. We are definitely going to see more. When this thing goes to trial next August, we will see it all. Call logs, text messages, pictures, everything.